Bienvenidos al podcast Pachacútec. Esta vez tenemos un invitado estrella, el filósofo y autor americano Max Border, cuyo libro La Singularidad Social ofrece una perspectiva intrigante sobre la gobernanza descentralizada y la transformación social. Detalle importante, este podcast ha sido grabado en inglés, pero los subtítulos podrán ser vistos en español. En este capítulo exploraremos ideas revolucionarias que podrían reconfigurar el panorama político del Perú para enfrentar nuestra actual crisis de representatividad. Mientras el Perú lucha con un Congreso a menudo percibido como desconectado de las necesidades del pueblo, los conceptos de Borders sobre redes distribuidas y procesos de toma de decisión de abajo hacia arriba se vuelven cada vez más relevantes. Su trabajo nos desafía a reimaginar cómo nos organizamos política y socialmente, ofreciendo potencialmente soluciones a las tendencias tiránicas que hemos presenciado en nuestro sistema actual. También exploraremos el potencial de las zonas económicas especiales, o ZEDEs, la gobernanza competitiva y los medios descentralizados como herramientas para la transformación política y económica. Mientras Perú busca nuevos modelos de liderazgo, examinaremos cómo estas ideas podrían aplicarse en nuestro contexto único y ayudarnos a superar las limitaciones de la política partidista tradicional. Acompáñennos a profundizar en estos conceptos revolucionarios y su potencial para resolver la crisis de representación en la que está enfrascada el Perú, para crear un sistema de gobernanza más receptivo, eficiente y que mejore la libertad.
But this is fantastic. I really wanted to talk to you about if there is a chance for us to execute this decentralized project from the top to bottom, and not only from the bottom up, I guess. My question is mostly because I see that we need to create an exit through reform, because there's kind of no more physical space or physical land to fight for, but instead the battle, I think, it's in the mind of people. So countries like Peru that have been taken by corruption, by politicians that just don't even listen to the constitution, what do we do with them?
Yeah, I think we have to be pragmatic in this day and age. Certainly, we want to be idealist as well, but let's take this in a couple of chunks, okay?
Mhm.
I think it would, I mean, if you'll permit me, I think it'll benefit your listeners to really sit with what top down versus bottom up means, okay?
Certainly.
So bottom up changes to the rules that would allow, and by the way, I think we share the objective of developing new jurisdictions, okay, that decentralize power, particularly away from institutions that have been corrupted, that are predatory or parasitic or both on the people they rule. You get, for example, in Peru, a kind of a ruling class where the corporate and business community stays very close to the ruling class, and they have a very tightly wound relationship that involves a sort of exchange of money and power, and that is almost an impenetrable force from the people who have to feed that beast. And so certain kinds of advances that you might hope in economic and social terms don't come about. And you have a massive informal sector where it becomes very difficult for entrepreneurs, ordinary entrepreneurs, whether that's someone who makes a street vendor or someone who sells food at the market, have to ply their wares on the informal economy rather than the formal economy. And that keeps them rather poor. It becomes difficult to scale their businesses. Scaling one's business requires getting into the formal economy, but that takes all manner of steps and processes that require the corruption to climb that, to be able to scale. And so they become corrupted by that process, or they don't succeed in climbing that ladder.
Yes. Yes.
So the top-down reforms would be in some way, so a bottom-up reform might be something that's either a technological means, some sort of revolutionary secession leaving a country to go to another country that is more hospitable. These are kind of bottom-up reforms. These are reforms that a person can take upon themselves to do. Whereas a top-down solution, as I'm understanding it, and I want to make sure that we have the same definition, would be a political reform that would give rise to changes where you in some way oblige the powerful to make a change that opens the door to either reducing the regulatory burdens for the poorer entrepreneurs in the informal economy so that they can come online, or in some other way reduces corruption or creates more opportunities to escape a legal regime that is working at odds with the most vulnerable people in society. Is that more or
Yes.
less correct in the way you're
Yes.
framing it?
Yes, perfect. That's just perfect. Thank you for doing that, because I just realized I just throw a really complex and compact thing to a first-time listener who probably is wondering why the hell, what are they talking about all of a sudden? And I would like to also add more context to this, because we've been dealing with a representation crisis. I think that's the best way to describe it. The political system here has been so destroyed that political parties no longer represent the people; they just represent their interest. And this has been a growing trend across Latin America, and it was first seen, for example, in Argentina, when 6 or 10 years ago, I think there was a movement towards digital democracy, they call it. And it was a girl called Pia Mancini and Santi, I think it's a software guy and a product girl. It was really interesting combination. And they didn't manage to change the system, but at least they managed to point to a problem that was the representation crisis. In Peru, I think people no longer believe in representative democracy. And while reading your book, for example, I became even more aware of the fact that other types of democracies exist. That the model we have doesn't have to be the be all and all. It's not even perfect. The Swiss people has already a better model, that is the direct democracy with cantons and everything. But very recently, the digital minister of Taiwan, for example, has started a movement towards, again, digital democracy, but powered by AI. I think now we have a chance to underthrow an institution like the Congress, thanks to the technology. Like, the opportunity has opened up, and I see kind of the stars aligning towards that direction. And that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. That's why the first question I asked was like, can we create an exit through reform? Can we exit the political system we currently have here in Peru through a reform that just deletes the need of political parties, that allows finally the emergence of politics as a personal and an individual endeavor to talk to your fellow citizen and just try to work things out, speaking instead of comforting.
I have very mixed feelings about democracy as such, and you know this about me. Excuse my computer making the noise.
No.
And I think Latin America is a really good example of why democracy, even a democracy that is less corrupted, representative democracy that is less corrupt, can be problematic. The question is, if we started off by talking about how we can create a set of institutions or rules that allow more people to come into the formal sector, the formal economy, and enjoy the benefits of economies of scale, more or less, right? This is basic developmental economics. So you start with the institutional substrate, Does the institutional substrate cause any given person to be freighted with too much to succeed, right?
Mhm.
If the reforms, the democratic reforms, were about stripping out all of that stuff, the levers of corruption. Let's say you need a business license. Oh, well, it takes, 230 days out of a year of full-time work for this poor person to get a business license, and it involves this many steps. Well, that, of course, benefits a cadre of lawyers. It benefits a cadre of government officials who can sit up there with their rubber stamps and say, gimme, 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 and I'll help you get this rubber stamp. Then you go to the next person and it's the same process, right? Over and over again.
Yes.
So greasing all the palms is a drain and a drag. So they say, to hell with it. I'm going to stay out in the informal economy. Now, not everything is economic. Some things are cultural. That's absolutely true. But what if you have a culture, a very strong culture, as Latin America does, of wealth redistribution? If the goal of using democracy is to redistribute goodies
Mhm.
from the successful, those who've managed to navigate the system, or even after the fact, when the system has been reformed, and then you have extremely high marginal taxation rates on corporations and individuals, such that the incentive is muted, and the incentive of the entrepreneur is muted, and the incentive for the one who would undertake entrepreneurship under the right circumstances is also muted because they're getting free money. Then you're not getting where, even if your democratic process is clean as a whistle.
Yes.
So in Latin America, the powerful love to find ways to protect themselves through law and regulation to keep their monopolies intact. And it's no wonder, therefore, that the common people turn to some species of socialism to bring them down, because they're the only ones who hold the wealth, and they use the wealth to keep a rein on the power.
Yeah.
It's an auction.
Yep.
But if you get an 80-20 distribution and you get a lot of very rich people, even though you're starting to develop more of a middle class than you might otherwise have, you're still going to get this phenomenon of, oh, well, if I can vote for higher taxation and redistribution, you destroy the incentives of both the recipients and those from whom those taxes are taken. And we've seen that time and time again throughout the world.
Yes.
And the reforms in the 70s and 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s in Sweden, in New Zealand, in Ireland, all of these, after these reforms, you saw massive improvements in quality of life, in economic growth, and so on. And that is because they reached a point where they were going to default, where the government was going to implode and the economy was terrible. So they were forced to reform.
Mhm.
But the reforms were regulatory reforms, not democratic reforms per se. So it's a sticky wicket, because this idea of top-down reform goes against all the incentives of those in power. If you have a successful populist revolution where the people really are much more readily in charge, they have to be able to demand market participation rather than redistribution. If they don't, it doesn't matter.
Yes. Well, you take exactly one of the problems I was having to deal with. This situation of democracy certainly problematic. And I was thinking, how can polycentrism go wrong? For example, if I manage to become president and we decide no longer have a Congress, people voting for their own to first have a more decentralized lawmaking, meaning have a federalist country, which Peru is not, I think would be better. But at the same time, the use of laws to, again, to create or to take from the rich to distribute to the poor, it's so absurd that it really gets me wonder, what would people do with legislative power? Like, okay, should we? Okay, and that's why I would like to ask you, what's your dream about the Jeffersonian society or the consent of the governed? Can that be created from the bottom up? No, from the bottom up or the up to bottom? Is that possible in that order? Like a political reform can bring the consent of the governed.
You mean for an organization
For a
or
country.
for a country?
For a country. For a country.
Yeah, I don't think you have much of a choice. Let's take a real example though, and you're probably familiar with this, but your listeners may not be. And that's the Honduran example.
Mm.
In Honduras, there was a top down followed by a bottom up example, set of examples.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what developing countries do is they opt to make legal carve-outs in some sense or other or special economic zones.
Yeah.
So this isn't exactly federalism. Federalism, we can fetishize federalism. We have to be very careful, because if you don't have massive reforms at the top, at the federal level, and you institute another layer of government at the local level, and you just have now 2 layers instead of 1, that could actually be worse, because then you're having corruption locally and you're having corruption at the top, and it's not clear that there's going to be a stable equilibrium that's going to work for your people, right?
Yes.
The hope is that you give enough, that you devolve power from the top to the regional powers, and then the regional powers compete for people to come from one region or another because they make it more hospitable. Okay.
Yes. Reducing the cost of exiting.
Reduce the cost of exiting. That's right. Exactly. And so some of those jurisdictions, let's say Peru, divided up into a series of jurisdictions that were relatively self-governing, that the federal government only took responsibility for a few things, maybe a national military, maybe some basic environmental protections, and a Supreme Court, things like that.
Yeah.
But everything else got devolved down to these regions. And if that were the case, I think you would start to see dynamics that are favorable to growth and development of some of the regions. And then as the other regions start realizing, now this doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. Sometimes you'll see, oh, look at what they're doing. We need to do more of that or we're going to lose our people. Or sometimes you get, like, for example, in California in the United States, they just keep getting worse and worse, and they keep losing people, and it's not clear when they're going to learn their lesson. It's like they're going to empty the whole state before they realize that they got to reform.
Yep.
And that's happening even with cities within California. You know, San Diego does a lot better job, for example, than San Francisco in terms of basic governance and money spent and so on. So persuading people who benefit from the status quo to enact something like this is going to require a degree of desperation that means that there will be unanimity.
Yep.
And it's only before you find desperate straits that any of these countries reformed, whether that reform is done illiberally or through legislation or whatever. So the top-down model is very hard, but let me go back quickly, and I won't keep banging on about this, but let me go back to the Honduran example. Honduras had a more conservative or free market government come in in the early to mid 2000s.
Okay.
And around about 2010, 2011, something like that, the Honduran government passed a legislation called the REDS, which is the acronym, and that one was too far. It didn't pass constitutional muster. It was struck down. They came back and did it again and passed the ZEDEs.
Yep.
And you'll be able to
Famous
say in
ZEDEs.
Spanish what it is. Zonas económicas, something like that.
Yep.
Economic zones.
Economic zone.
Okay. So those special economic zones were radically simplified, and they say you don't have to abide by the federal regulations and laws pretty much at all as a business. You have to abide by some of the basic criminal law things, right? So if they have prohibitions on drugs and sales of drugs and things like that, that's still going to be in force. So you're not going to have some libertarian paradise where they're all doing drugs and selling drugs and,
selling children.
I mean, I actually think that would be better for Central America because of the cartels, because it would take the power away from the cartels through competition. But they're not going to do that. Very likely going to do that mainly because cartels don't want them to.
Yeah.
And so they persist with the status quo. However, in Honduras, they're starting to see these pockets of prosperity forming, more foreign and direct investment and local investment into these communities. Some of the communities are just good places to live and work. Some of them are special economic zones dedicated to attracting certain kind of businesses. And it's working. And the more it starts to work, they still have to pay basic taxes to the capital. And once those tax monies start flowing in, and they start flowing in more readily, the more likely it is that the powerful are going to leave them alone to be cash cows for them.
Yep.
That is the hope. That is the status quo right now. There have been some socialists that have taken over and have threatened them.
Yes.
But they're in a very good legal position right now to fight it off.
Oh,
so
that sounds great. You just lay out the case that I wanted to talk about, which was the first project of decentralization here in Peru, taken by Alejandro Toledo. I think it was 10, 12 years ago, maybe a little bit more, 20 years ago, because when I was a child, I knew about these cases of corruption in my region, Ancash, and it was all over the place, but because it was a two-layer, all the corruption just stay on this one, and nobody in the country knew that all this case of corruption was happening here. It was a really famous one, actually. And the guy was one of the ones that stole the most here in Peru. I think his name is, they call it La Bestia, César Álvarez Aguilar. Now, I still, as a child, remember listening to the corruption cases on the radio every morning. It was like, it became somewhat normal, but at the same time annoying, really annoying for me, because nobody knew how to do something and nobody could do anything anyways. The guy had control over the media, the guy who had control over the judicial power, and I think there was this game between the Congress and the regional government, they call it, gobierno regional. And Congress basically create a situation where they could win even more money from this second layer by just changing law and not allowing them to execute in a project. So they have to go back to the congressman and just lobby them, and it was crazy. And when you describe it, I was like, yes, you got it. And that's not what I want to repeat if I would manage to get to power, for example, because I knew it wouldn't work. Oh man.
Let me ask you this. I know you're meant to be interviewing me, but we're having a conversation, so I hope
Please.
you'll permit me. Do you have any kind of system in Peru that respects the equivalent of what you might call reservations for indigenous people, the indigenous peoples of Peru, where they might claim greater level of sovereignty and be able to live outside of the auspices of the federal government? Is there anything like that in Peru?
I think there is, but there are very specific cases for which it has been approved and they've been defended. For example, I think there's a case of a lady fighting against a giant mining company, and because she was the original owner of that piece of land, she won. Like
Hmm.
it was David and Goliath, and I think for specific tribes in the jungle, I think it applies, but for the general population, it's really difficult.
So the reason I bring up indigenous peoples is I have a friend whom you may have encountered or will soon encounter, named Joe McKinney. And Joe and his wife, who is Colombian, her name's Natalie. They together started a corporation in a Native American or Indian reservation in South Carolina. It's a very small reservation, but they sat down with the Indians over many months at a local restaurant and offered to start to do a startup with them, which is essentially an administrative, a legal administration that would be instantiated on sovereign Indian land. And you know, so that the native peoples would be 51% owners of this corporation to 49% of for Joe and his wife and the other principals of that organization. But they would take a minority stake, but they would run this organization and instantiate the law. So much like Prospera in Honduras has a corporate function to administer that local law in these very, very, you know, small enough jurisdictions that they're not, you know, going to amass armies or something like that, right? They're just special economic zones, but they have a public-private administrative function. And there is a similar model being enacted in the Catawba Nation in South Carolina in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean that federal law doesn't go away, but it means that in the United States, it could be one of the freest economic zones in the country. And therefore also, to some degree, the world. And they're trying to create legal innovations that would make it so. So in some sense, they're a competitor with Prospera, but in other ways, they focus on Web3 companies and other kinds of financial plays, whether that's you know, cryptocurrency or whether it's DeFi or other kinds of financial institutions. Because as it happens, this Indian reservation is right near Charlotte, which happens to be my hometown. And Charlotte is a major financial hub for banking. So they want to make it hospitable to banking, but also hospitable to alternatives to the banking system. And they've gotten a lot of investment from the financial community in Charlotte, as I understand it, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So the long and short of it is, are there little swatches of sovereignty in Peru or in Peru's neighbors that would allow for these tiny jurisdictions, these special economic zones to form? If you could lobby, or if you, a colleague, you and a group of other people could lobby for just one little patch, maybe, it would be beyond your wildest dreams to have a 5 square mile patch of soil
Yeah.
that would allow you to escape the legal regime of that country for anything that has to do with business, apart from environmental regulation, apart from assuming those aren't too onerous, right?
Yep.
That could be the start of something special. Just one zone.
Might be enough, right? At least to start the momentum going.
Exactly.
Just for listeners, ZEDEs means Zona de Empleo y Desarrollo Económico in Spanish. I think I have to do more research on that. I hear the term because I go to this kind of spaces. The network state concept was the one actually who introduced me to this whole world. And ever since I got in contact with the ideas of Balaji Srinivasan, I was like, we have to rethink the state in a way that makes sense. But what happens, for example, with when Congress purposely converts parks or these protected zones into places that you can just destroy the forest, plant your oil seeds, or there's been this famous case here in Peru very recently. The Congress just passed an unconstitutional law by force, and they make it so a specific corporation could just go and destroy big part of the jungle. It will no longer be considered illegal, and they will just be fine. So these kind of situations make it really difficult for Peruvians to think that any protected zone is going to be defended as long as there are corrupt politicians just making and doing whatever they want with the law. I think I hear this from Daniel Schmatzenberger, quoting, I think, a novel. He said that dumb politicians break the law, dumb politicians, no, it's not politicians, bad burglars. Oh man, but the thing is that as long as you have the power to make the laws, like you can change the rules of the game so it fits whatever you want to do. And that's way too problematic. I once heard Balaji talk about that there's no more unstable system than a system which you can change the laws as part of the system. Like every time you just change the law, change the game, everything just unravels and there's no possibility of doing something proper, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and there has to be a sweet spot between flexibility in the law and it being, I mean, usually static law comes about because of statutes, right? And
Yes.
the difference between statute and common law is a very important distinction. The French call it Code Civil, right? It's civil code versus, and that's another problem that we've seen, forgive my biases, but the Anglophone countries have done it best because the English common law, right, comes from Anglo-Saxon law, and it's very old, but it's a very flexible and robust and localized form of law based on precedent and case law. Otherwise, and you get the development of these certain patterns in the law of tort, which is just like, we know how to govern property. We know how to govern a river. If I own the river and you sully the river, then I have a tort case against you. I just have to prove based on a reasonable legal standard that you harmed or injured me or injured my property in some way. And so we resolve matters that way. It's really about identifying injury and redressing that injury or compensating for those injuries. That is the more or less the system of common law and the way it operates. I mean, there are some other features of it, obviously, but those are very important. The protection of property rights and the protection of contracts. Once you have that, and once you establish who was there first, like the woman who you said in Peru who was able to go up against the big company because she owned the land.
Yep.
That should be there should be no argument about that whatsoever. If you know a Native American tribe owns a piece of land and they would try to put a pipeline through it, if it's their land and they have land rights down, you know, to 10 feet below the soil, then if the pipeline operator wants to build through there and can't, tough shit, right?
Yep.
On the other hand, if they are able to tunnel under it because land rights only go down so far and so on, you can, your common law should be able to handle with flexibility all these eventualities.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do statute law, it's actually less flexible because that's how the corruption happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, so the statutes won't be changed willy-nilly. Once they exist, they'll be in amber because you'll get all of these people around them who benefit from the status quo. And nobody wants to let go of those benefits. So they're going to fight like hell against you if you try to change it.
Yeah. In Spanish, we have a saying, this goes like, echa la ley, echa la trampa. Once the law is done, the trap is right within it. And just for rounding up this idea, the quote that I wanted to say was, dumb criminals break laws, smart criminals make laws.
Okay.
And definitely I wanted to talk about law in this conversation too, because it's a big thing. And it's a big problem here too, because it being infiltrated, the case that I talked to you about, the Patricia Benavides case, yesterday was ousted, but when she was in power, she allowed for Congress and the president to just go along with corruption cases and nothing would happen to them because they were secretly talking to each other and just like, you do whatever you want, I will do whatever I want. Nobody's gonna mess with each other's corruption cases. And Peru was just in chaos. So I think this differentiation between common law and Justinian law, Roman law, is really important, and not many people know about it. How would you, for example, go to reform a judicial system, and how can we make justice the primary force of conflict resolution in a country, for example? I think you wrote about jurisprudence, no, juristopia, I think, like taking law as the absolute ultimate way to end resolute problems or something.
Yeah, this is encourage people to dust off the old blog called Unenumerated from Nick Szabo. Nick Szabo's ideas are well represented in the original Bitcoin white paper. Some people believe that Szabo is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Mm-hmm.
I have my doubts about that, but if he's not Satoshi Nakamoto, his ideas are all over it. Without Nick Szabo, there would be no Bitcoin.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So even though somebody took his ideas and put them together in such a way that made Bitcoin, without Szabo, there would be most of the ideas in the white paper
Do not make sense.
They wouldn't work.
Yeah.
He solved the Byzantine generals problem, for example, and so on. But one of the things about him is not only that is he a software developer, he's also a legal theorist. And so his brilliance in this idea of juristopia comes, and part of it comes in making that distinction So I shamelessly steal from one of the finest legal minds, you know, in the world, who happens also to be a computer scientist. And I mean, I've been fully aware for a long time about some of the problems with a statute Justinian law versus
Common law.
common law. And I have to say, there's you know, less and less of the law in the United States is common law, despite our heritage, you know, despite the American heritage as being a colony of Britain. So this is an unfortunate thing, but most law is crafted, you know, state law is crafted in legislatures at the state level. And of course, at the federal level, we have Congress. And this is all, I mean, there are features of common law that enter into the picture, but it's a lot of statutes.
Yeah.
We have a federal register that fills the room, you know, pretty much. So there are, you know, I don't even know how many pages. It's you know, for me is an unreadable, uncountable number. But the thickness of the density of federal regulations mean that there is tremendous opportunity for corruption. In my country, the same thing happens all over the world. Where you find more statutes and more regulations, and a lot of the times the statutes are not all that complicated. They'll just say, we want an agency to administer it, and they'll come up with the rules. And this is the framework. That's just handing regulators carte blanche to legislate for you. It's a terrible idea. And of course, when those regulators do that, all of the lobbyists come and say, let me help you make these rules. And they all benefit in their own ways, and it becomes a tangle.
Yep.
So, you know, this model of the special economic zone is meant to say, we want out of that. We want an escape from that. We just want a clean slate. We want a small jurisdiction. We want to start over. And the corruption fighting mechanisms, I would say, usually would, you know, if I could, and I'm going, by the way, based on someone who's never actually done this, just being an observer in the world. You have to have a culture of people who are committed to stamping out corruption at the start.
Yep.
No doubt about it. It's not just, it's like the rules will be magic. There's no way. You have to have a group of people committed to reducing corruption. You have to have, in as many ways possible, competition among providers of the law, among administrators of the law, and so on. Because really we're talking about competitive governance between jurisdictions, say from the SEZ and the mainland, but we're also talking about competition inside. And that is that's a stretch for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it. If we talk about, you know, courts that can compete with one another. We can select arbiters. We can select judges. You can have private protective associations, and you know, in terms of enforcement. And two different companies have two different associations, and they're competing, and there's a negotiation between the companies. That, you know, of course, there's always an opportunity for them to cartelize. You don't want that. But this stuff is not easy. It is not easy. But we have to remember that even if there are some failures, even if there are some errors, no system is going to be perfect. But it has only to be sufficiently better relative to the status quo to give people a place to escape and to start over.
Yes, exactly that. And we need to start an exodus from this current system as it is. That's why I'm really interested into creating an exit through a reform, because I don't see any other way to at least help my own country. I think, do you know about Milei and this whole Milei, like how?
That's an excellent example of top-down reform.
Yep.
I am shocked that he's getting away with what he's getting away with, given the power structure in Argentina that has built up over decades.
Yeah.
I mean, since the Perón family or whatever.
Yep. Peronistas, yes.
Peronistas, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. But for example, I have libertarian friends who don't consider him as a libertarian because he's no longer he hasn't destroyed the state, he's just reforming it, so they're mad at him. But at the same time, I see that, yeah, I know. They are a bit, what's the word for this, puristic or orthodox about it. But anyhow, I
mean,
think,
just on that note, I just want to say really quickly, there are two basic camps of libertarians, and both of them are wrong. Okay, one camp is the minarchists, the other camp is the anarchists. It's like the goal is behind you both. Yeah. We're all here operating in the real world, not in theory, and we're trying to get past you both. But we're never going to do that. Yeah. So to the extent that we can make any movement at all in that direction is all we can hope for. This is reality. There's never going to be a magical moment where we can all just suddenly have libertopia. It's just not going to happen. This is why we have to think in terms of the very pragmatic terms that we're thinking of right now. Javier Milei, whether you like him or not, as a purist libertarian, he has done more to reform Argentina than any other single person has done to reform anything in the direction of human freedom.
Yeah.
In the last 50 years, with the exception maybe of I won't say 50 years, because I would say that New Zealand, the Rogernomics was a pretty massive improvement. But
Lee Kuan Yew already.
Lee Kuan Yew would be
another good case.
Would be before, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I think it's.
He's older than 50. Yeah, it would be before 50 years. Maybe I don't remember. But in any case, Lee Kuan Yew is a great example. But Lee Kuan Yew is also not a purist libertarian either. He was extremely
pragmatic.
He was pragmatic. And Singapore is of a size and scale where you could think of running it like a business.
Yeah.
It's, you can't think about, Trump always said, I'm a businessman, I'm going to help the economy, which is silly. It's like, you can't run a nation of 350 million people like a business.
Yeah.
You just can't. You can make marginal improvements that improve the quality of life for people, reducing the cost of energy, for example, or reducing regulations and regulatory burdens, starting up these opportunity zones, which he did, educational tax credits and things like that. There's all kinds of things you can do to nip and tuck at the margins. And I'm not saying that, and this is for top-down solutions, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
But the bottom up goes the same way. It's still got to be pragmatic. Yes. What can you get away with in the face of power?
Yes, always. Don't just stay on your head. I think that's a big problem.
Well, your head is up your ass, right? If you're that kind of libertarian, it's like, they've got the guns in the jails. What do you expect? Right? He's like, well, no, Javier Milei's got the guns in the jails. He can do whatever he wants to. Well, at what point does he become illiberal either way? Right?
Yeah.
If he starts rounding up his political enemies and imprisoning them, or going against I assume they have some sort of parliamentary system in Argentina.
Yeah.
um, going against the legislators, even, you know, then at what point is that illiberal?
Yeah.
It's a tough call, right?
Yeah, tough call.
And I'm curious to what you think about that. What do you think about people like another good example of
Bukele?
one who's far more illiberal is Bukele.
Yeah. No, let me give you my take because this is important. Peru is in a search for someone with the conviction of Milei to bring down the massive managerial state, but at the same time they want this kind of tough leader that is smart, somewhat charismatic, and kind of can lead the way forward, like Bukele. So they're looking for a mix. And I said this because during the election process for Argentina, we have propaganda reaching this country. And they said that 30% of Argentinian viewers were actually paying attention to Milei and the things he was saying and the way he was trying to convey the message against the state and against the managerial regime. And it was great. And I remember that there was this sort of religiosity around it, this whole use of parables, the use of imagery, the use of the lion, the way also Milei conducts himself in some of the speeches he has. Like he has that energy, that preacher energy that can rail the people up, and that is required for change. And
Especially in Latin America.
yeah, especially in Latin America, it has this staying power, the power to swing the public consciousness. And there's this libertarian in Spain, for example, who said that before Milei, nobody even knew that libertarians exist. Now, after Milei, people already have like, okay, they exist, and it's a possibility to just reduce the state to some degree, being an anarchist, being an anarchist, kind of, it's already in the public consciousness. But before that, it was not there. Even I have to admit that before I made this libertarian friend here in Peru, who to me, he represents that person who Peru is looking for, but he's still missing someone else. And that's where I fit in because he's kind of the what's the word for this? The warrior. He's just
Yeah.
missing
Firebrand is what we usually say.
oh, the firebrand. No, but
Yeah.
this two fathers division that Bart makes complete sense for me because I see that guy and the guy is brilliant, but he was a proper libertarian, and he, for example, was mad at Milei and that he's not being a proper libertarian and everything. But I just told him to be pragmatic, and the change done is real. He had to ally with politicians, sure, but at the very least, he's fixing that economy, and it's working. So
Yeah,
that's it.
he's reined in inflation. He's seeing growth. I mean, their inflation is still high,
Yeah.
but like it was really high.
It was about to skyrocket. Funny enough, Peru has had this period of hyperinflation too, back in the day with Alan Garcia. It was during that first government. It was long ago. People knew what Argentina was going through and is going through actually right now. And I guess that's why also people kind of pay attention to what happened there. And I think the fact that Milei was elected president set up a case that Peru and kind of has already an idea. Okay, we're looking for a Milei, we're looking for a Bukele. Where is him? I think my
Yeah.
yeah, I think my
Do
libertarian
you
friend.
think Peruvians see him and are curious? What do you think? Do you think that if a Malay came along, that there could be a domino effect?
Yes, yes, because people see him as because he talks about against the political caste, I guess. And people resonate with that message because we see a political caste here. But at the same time, the political caste in Peru, for example, play this card against communism. They always say that, oh, the communists, oh, the socialists are the ones who are against this government, and they always want to take control over. And Pedro Castillo, for example, the old president, was technically openly a communist who wants to, but it was just propaganda. It just, although the guy behind him, Vladimir Cerrón, was a proper Marxist, and he kind of speaks this language of the proletarian and everything, but it's just nonsense, political nonsense, and it's just, I see it as dead word, because no matter what they promise, they never they never deliver. Like, they can promise you the moon, and they won't deliver, for good or for bad. So
What? Yeah. I
but
was
yeah,
just going to ask you what is so in thinking about jurisdictional arbitrage, which is a fancy term for we're going to cross the border and have a better life. We're going to enjoy different laws, right?
yeah,
It used to be that Chile was the economic engine of South America, relatively speaking.
I think technically,
Say,
yeah, technically it is still now, I think, but it's just slowing down a bit.
yeah, and they're more socialists are taking over.
Yeah, again.
Again.
Oh God.
And I'm not trying to cheerlead for Pinochet, but did you see a lot of people leave Peru to go to Chile?
If politics gets here, it gets worse here, like I would even consider going to Chile, because just if there's nothing I can do, if they control the elections, as many people claim they will, it's done. Like, I'm just leaving. I'm out. I'm exiting.
Right.
There's no way to reform this mess.
What about Argentina? Do you think it can become a magnet if it improves?
I think it is already a magnet. I have seen news that, for example, OpenAI or Sam Altman, someone who was talking to Milei to bring some data centers for AI there. And I think energy arbitrage is also a really big new magnet that can be created all over the world in order to bring technology forward and distribute it. I think, for example, I've been involved with this as a volunteer. There's this institution that brings the organization's called is LUT, LUTW, lighting up the world, and they used to go to really remote areas where the grid will never come, and they were placing solar panels with batteries. It was great. It is great. And since the creation of Starlink, they can also bring internet. And the trip I did very recently was to bring internet to a school high in the mountains. They were even in this kind of gray zone, legal gray zone, because it's it's their home, but because it was bought a long time ago by a company. It was supposed to become a dam. They're like in a place where the state can go in, but the 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 company that bought that place no longer exists, I think, because of, again, corruption. So they will never get some help from our beloved state. So at the very least, we managed to bring electricity and internet, and I saw people gathering around the Wi-Fi, and it was lovely because even old people can have their own phones, and they could go as soon as they got phones. They got the internet, like they were calling their family, trying to tell them, oh, look, here I am at home, and look, I'm calling you, I'm connecting with you. It was heartwarming, and I kind of realized, okay, we need to make probably internet some form of good, public good, or something. We have to bring internet to the people. And before I forget it, there's a thing that I would like to discuss too. What do we do with liberalism, bourgeois suicide of the West, managerial state? I think you wrote very recently about this, like the opening without restrictions. you open the door to ideologies that openly oppose democracy. And I think the death of liberalism. I think Burkham wrote about this. You also wrote very recently about it. I think the return of the paternalistic state. I think that was the Substack. I was reading it, and there is this sort of imbalance. Like you have to be tolerant to the intolerant. What do we do about that?
I don't know. I think I think I think you have to take that as far as it can go to be tolerant to the intolerant. Until they tell you what they're going to do to you.
Yeah.
You know? And if it, you have to, this is a paradox that has lived with us for a long time.
Yeah.
And I say more liberalism is better as an answer. In terms of speech and expression,
Everything goes.
anything goes. Well, except threats of violence. I don't think you should be legally able to threaten violence, but you should have to sharpen your arguments. You should have to make your case. You should have to persuade people, tell your stories, have people understand who they are. The mythos is very important, as our gang would say.
Yep.
And and we got to do a better job of it. But I realize that I'm talking to someone for whom the entire continent was taken over by socialists for a long time.
Yep. That's why that's why using people who don't know, doesn't even have to be, people who is not a communist but is against the government gets labeled as communist, and then it becomes an object, and then just you can just throw rocks at them. It's pretty classical tactic that they use here. And I think, for example, we have the same situation you have in the States. And I wanted to talk about media because that's a power that people often don't really think much about. Fox News, I think it's the 24/7 fake news type of media. It has turned into that or not? Just to clarify, what do you think?
Fox News, I mean, I think their batting average is marginally better than the other ones, but they're carrying water for some powerful people for sure. I am most heartened by the decentralized media that is forming because of Substack, because of a lot of new media players who are successful, and they're unwilling to toe the line in either direction. I really like this fragmentation of the media. I think that is the best thing we're seeing. We're starting to see the old model breaking down.
Exactly. That's what happened here. Here, for example, we still have a media called Willax TV, and they just throw fake news at everyone. And because, for example, this Patricia Benavides was in power, he kind of could take the things they said, the hit piece they made, and have some judicial go after them. It was crazy. And they have a power that most people just write off as, okay, it's the fourth power of the state to some degree. But I wanted to talk about that because here in Peru, we have an even more vibrant and new source of media, which is YouTube and TikTok, for example. A lot of people do that here. And we probably can reduce the predation cost by increasing the access to the internet. Instead of trying to cancel them, let's just bring internet and let people decide, or give people the option to listen more. The paradox of liberalism and the new landscape of media, because I think it's really important. I already described the case here. We have Willax, which is just throwing fake news at everyone, but they also have a physical arm of people called La Resistencia, for example, that they specifically go to people in the media and just literally throw shit at their places. It's
Through shit?
yeah, like real shit.
Oh,
Yeah, imagine the level of of other, I don't even know how to call it. This kind of
disdain.
disdain. Oh man, those type of
Yeah.
people are in Peru, for example, we have not the comis, but instead we have los caviares. Like they would eat caviar. The people in the left who often just say or post something against the government in favor of communism from their iPhone type of thing. And
Mm.
then we have the other extreme in the right. We call it DBA, derecha bruta y achorada. Achorado means for Peruvian Spanish, kind of like someone who wants to fight and wants to solve everything just by engaging in some form of combat. So that's the kind of landscape, the political landscape we have here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's getting increasingly like that in my country.
Really?
Yeah, we have sort of extremist groups on the left and right, and they like to clash in the streets. They like to come to each other's protests, and yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't find any of that. I mean, I just think protesting in the streets is kind of it can be meaningful, but usually it's not.
Yeah.
When 250,000 people gather in the streets to demand the ouster of a leader, that's powerful.
Yep.
When you have, you know, couple thousand people making trouble and blocking traffic, I don't have any time for it. Nobody likes it. Nobody cares. I remember back in the, what was it, the 70s and 80s, you had the Shining Path.
What is that?
The Shining Path, I don't know what you call it in Spanish. It was a guerrilla movement that they used to bomb
Sendero Luminoso. Yeah, the
yeah,
Shining Path. Oh,
yeah,
yes. Oh, yeah. We have that. Oh man, we have the worst type of commies.
lefties,
Yeah, the lefties,
commies. Yeah,
yeah, man. They
but
create so much havoc and so much trauma. Uh,
yeah,
uh,
at least that's not so much anymore.
yeah, no, it's not. It's not anymore. But still, it's the perfect abject for the right to just claim that, oh no, they are commies. Just kill them. Easy
Right.
peasy.
You know, the thing now this is a theory, but I think we're already starting to see it happen. And I wrote about this in the Social Singularity, and it's starting to materialize even more.
Yeah.
But not to put too fine a point on it, or to add a little bit to the point, is the fragmentation of media in the manner that we're seeing now. If we're able to, so remember we were talking about freedom of speech.
Yep.
And as an American, I'm very liberal about that.
Yeah.
Well,
Free speech absolutist.
I'm an absolutist, but people your age in the United States are not. They want to censor everything they don't like. So
Yeah.
they don't understand that if they continue to build the apparatus of censorship at the highest levels of power, that it will turn on them as soon as the other party takes power.
Yes.
So be very careful what you ask for, because it's going to come back to bite you in the ass. However, and so legal protection of free speech, I think, is very important. And of course, in my country, that doesn't mean that any magazine or newspaper or anything owes you the right to publish there. If it's private, you know, they can kind of do what they want. Now, I believe in the spirit of free speech to some degree. So if I had a major newspaper, I would want to have an array of voices. But that doesn't mean that I would tolerate anything, because there are some things that are intolerable, you know, in the like Karl Popper or what's her name? Of course I've forgotten it. That's my old brain. But another Jew who survived the Holocaust, who is a very great intellectual woman. Her name is just right out of my mind. Hannah Arendt.
Arendt. Yes.
Hannah Arendt. Yes, thank you. You know, they warned about this and this paradox of toleration. And I think there is an extent to which, with technology, once the technology matures in the distributed ledger space, you won't have a choice but to tolerate, because it'll be difficult to censor.
Yes.
It'll be free speech by design, not by law. And that's an interesting thing to, yeah.
Yeah, what a different world that would be. Even more problematic if we don't understand the power that each person is carrying with the things it said. And having the ability to say something anonymously also empowers people who just want to throw shit at you, because there's no way to just kind of follow whatever they are doing. And what do
Well,
you
this
think?
is the problem with TikTok.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we don't know how those algorithms serve anything up to anyone. It's you know, you have argued separately in our private conversation that it's like a mirror.
Yep.
And I would argue that it's a distorted mirror. So if you tweak the algorithms a certain way, let's use the mirror metaphor. If you make the mirror magnify my nose, I already have a big nose. But if you make it this big, it's going to look awful, right? So you're going to see more and more of that, the unpleasant things.
Yeah.
Or if there is some sort of mimetic power that is being gained that is countercultural or somehow even unhealthy for the culture to create a mass movement. For example, I am not hostile to people who are trans, but I'm extremely hostile to the idea that you would recruit young, impressionable teenagers into trans ideology.
Yeah.
No time for that shit. And I think there are algorithms, whether that's by design or by default, that allow that to happen. And I don't think that's particularly healthy. So
yeah.
That being said, you know, having just different apps, different alternatives to the mainstream media, I think is important, even if that's TikTok.
Yes. Yes. I would like to add just to get to the TikTok case that, if you remember, TikTok had to be toned down even in China. Like, Chinese realized, okay, this is screwing up maybe a generation. So let's make it so the mirror reflects more science and cultural stuff. And they did it because they have control over the algorithm. And I think it's great. I think it can be used as a tool for distributing culture instead of just girls dancing and thirst traps and stupid nonsense. But again, it's the mirror. It's
I have a hard
problematic.
time with this one. I really do. I have a hard time with this one. Obviously, I want people to see more of the things I like and that I believe,
Mhm.
but I don't want them to see more of the things that crazy authoritarians like and believe. So I don't know what to think about algorithms except to say it would be nice if you could have much more, if you had open source, cryptographically protected social media, whether that's of the TikTok short videos or
Mhm.
something like a Twitter or what have you. Nostr. Nostr is a promising invention.
Oh, let me check that out.
Yeah, Nostr.
No, so simple protocol from the distance. Oh, similar to Farcaster, maybe? Or censorship resolution. Yeah, cool. I will have
Yeah,
to look it up.
yeah. So, if we start to get more like that and have more mass migration into it, and if you add to that people's ability to uh, choose their own algorithms in a way, really set up things that they want to see themselves, much more than what you want to impose on someone, that might be good. And the third thing I think that would really make a big difference is if we can develop a system, and I'll shut up after this because I know it's getting long, and
No, don't
feel
worry.
free to edit this out.
No.
If we can find a way to develop a truth tracking system, if you know what I mean, some kind of mechanism by which people can improve upon, for example, what Twitter has right now, or X, sorry, what X has right now, which is the community notes.
System, yeah.
If you can improve on that and have a fractal of countervailing, competing countervailing evidence that can always be, that has a validation mechanism, and you put skin in the game, people compete. They can pay and compete to see what turns out to be right over time. Because
Oh,
yeah, you can have like a betting market on it. Now, there is no independent arbiter of truth. If there were, we could just go straight to that.
yeah.
So the idea that there's some endpoint that is always that's going to determine the truth with the capital T is not available to us. It is a deeply human problem. But what we can have is increasing the likelihood of some bit of information being accurate or inaccurate, and market mechanisms for determining that. And increasing the likelihood is really all we need, you know?
Yep.
Somebody's got a piece of evidence they want to submit anonymously about your attorney general,
Yeah.
your corrupt attorney general. And all of a sudden that gets play. Well, all of a sudden someone says, no, that's not true. I have countervailing evidence that says it's not true. Here it is, or whatever. Or this can't be true. If she supposedly wrote this note, it was on a night where we have evidence that she was at a restaurant, whatever.
No.
I don't know. I'm just making up something, but there are ways to determine the veracity of something that would be, I think, a new kind of media focal point. And I really hope there are some technologists out there who will build that, because if that gets built, it's a complete game changer.
Yes. Yes, definitely. I think biology even discussed this in the network state book, because as long as you have an arbiter of truth, as long as you can cryptographically verify something and you can add evidence for it, we have finally have a book that cannot be um rewritten or messed with. And that's the beginning of history, of real history, maybe. So I don't know. There are many things that I actually would like to take this from, but I'm already kind of blanking because there was a really interesting topic I wanted to discuss, but it's gone. Like
Well, you know, we can do this again sometime.
it would be great because I think you nailed so many things that I wanted to talk about already. And I actually would like to go back to the social singularity just to round it up and tell people, okay, the book is going to be ready in a few weeks in Spanish.
Thanks to you.
Yeah. Get ready to read it because I think that's the future. I think we have to get rid of politicians. Like, funny notes, a congressman was found out to use ChatGPT to write a law. And the guy just copy pasted the whole thing. And people quickly found out, oh, this was done by ChatGPT because it said like, but there's no case for this law. And ChatGPT can assign it. So I think we can replace politicians or congressmen with an AI, and democracy will run better without them. But tell us about your book and what things you think you got right and what things you got wrong. And I think we're heading towards the social singularity for good.
I think the biggest thing I got wrong was my optimism in the book. I would have thought in writing that book at mid to late 2017, wrapping up the book in the beginning of 2018 and publishing it in summer of 2018, that today we would have seen more positive in the positive direction. So, for example, in that book, I show a lot of admiration for cryptocurrencies, for distributed ledger technologies, including blockchains. And there was tremendous promise in this. You and I have talked about how we went through the age of NFTs.
Yeah.
We went through the age of DeFi. When we went through about a 4 to 5 year period where we can call it the lost years of cryptocurrency. But it's going to come back, and it's going to come back, and the next wave is going to be really interesting. I hope. I have to keep optimism. So do you.
Yes.
If we don't, we lose. But and of course, I want the Gray Robes being an organization we're trying to develop, to be a source of inspiration for the next wave of technologists working in the cryptocurrency space, or the crypto space, if you like. Now, that said, I was overly optimistic about it in the book. I would have thought upon writing it that if I had looked back on it today, that more would have gotten done, more would have been achieved. I do mention the book Prospera.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
I make mention of it because it was very early stages. It was more of an idea just starting, it was starting to happen. And now they're really doing it. And I'm so proud of those guys. I know a lot of them, and they are tremendous entrepreneurs and founders, and they are going to do magnificent things. So I am hopeful about that. But I would have hoped that we would have gotten better. Now, what I am seeing that has gotten right is continued fracturing of the media space, which we're talking about. I think that's been a largely a good thing. The breaking up of the blue church continues apace. And this is Jordan Hall's term, but I think it's a useful trope. And I'm also hopeful that more and more people are getting the basic ideas around it, not necessarily from me. I'm very happy with my sales of the book. But if you take Balaji Srinivasan's Network State, you can add a 0 to the number of people who read my book, maybe 2 zeros. And yet there's enough overlap in the concepts that more and more people are being inspired at least to think along these lines. So if not me, Balaji, that's great. I am happy that in a manner of speaking, I got there first, but my God, is that man brilliant. And I want to see him continue to succeed with disseminating these kind of ideas. So if we need another Balaji or two, out there working, inspiring people, and I'm going to continue to do the best I can, not only with the gray robes, but in other capacities like this. I hope we'll start to really set people's minds ablaze. We'll start that empire of the mind.
Definitely. I think it's happening. I think Peru and Argentina are probably the two countries that have suffered the terror or having terrible politicians. So we're open to ideas like this. And we can take inspiration from what you have written and start a movement and just get rid of them.
Well, how you do that, oof, that's a tough one. But for me to argue that we need to get beyond politics is one thing. To tell you how to do it, that's quite another. But I think there are people who are showing the way right now, and I think the ZEDEs idea is a time that's going to mature and it's going to spread. If you can point to something and say, look at them, look at how prosperous they are, look at how peaceful they are, look at how successful they are. They're building a Hong Kong and Honduras. Once, 5 more years is all we need to start to see real gains. And then you can say, why can't we do that? I have a feeling that even though he's a bit of a strong man, I think Bukele is going to make a lot of gains in El Salvador. So we'll keep watching these real world examples. We'll look for the top down, as you say, and the bottom up solutions. And we'll just throw everything we can through good experiments with the right people on the right experiments, doing the best we can. And over time, we'll win, I think.
Yeah, we are in the right side of history, I think. And you were really early, way too early, let's say.
Well, you told me did you say you read The Sovereign Individual?
Yes.
Now they were early. I mean, those guys, I read that after writing The Social Singularity. I think I quote them in it, but I hadn't read it yet. Someone like near the end, they said, you need to read the Sovereign Individual. I was like, well, I'm going to grab a quote or something from it. Maybe it wasn't even in that book, but afterwards I thought, oh my word, these guys beat me to it by 20 years. We just need more. We just need more voices like them.
Yes, we need to spread them. This is my gospel. I think the fact that I choose a microprocessor as a symbol for my movement is quite remarkable, because after reading The Sovereign Individual, I was just like, whoa, the microprocessor is the future of the world. And technology is here to help us make the social singularity happen. It's happening. We just need to wake people up.
And our sovereignty as individuals in self-possession, capable of mastery. The technology is but a means for us to be more human, more connected, more peaceful, and more innovative. We can do it.
Yes, that's a great way to finish this off. Thank you, Max. You're awesome.